This paper was presented at the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium 2024, thanks to our media partner Highways News, and sponsored by AGD Systems, Four-Way Consulting, Traffic Group Signals, Smart Micro UK, TRL Software, PTV Group, Census Networks, and Starling Technologies.
We're going to talk about something, traffic signal design, but not a case study. We're going to talk about something that I deal with a lot in design concept and designs. I think many people here do this and what we're going to talk about, but without thinking about it. And so what we're trying to do is look into it and look into what's going on in the background, what people and drivers are doing when they use our designs, and how that can inform our design decisions. So we're looking at design, perception, and driver behaviour. So what we're really talking about, what I'm really wanting to talk about, is why drivers fail to use our designs correctly. We design a site, we put it together, it gets built perfectly as we've designed it. Our design is entirely in accordance with DMRB and Chapter 6, and yet accidents happen. People don't understand it. People phone up and complain about things that we never even thought of because they don't seem to get them. And what you may find is no matter how much you tell them, they still don't get it. So what we also notice is that in some places, the design will work. In many places, the design works, and it keeps on working. It's okay, it's fine. And then we get one site that, to all intents and purposes, to us, looks absolutely fine, and yet the public just fail to grasp it in the way we want them to. Excuse me. So perhaps we need to think differently about the problem and not just do the same as we always do. Maybe we need to think in more detail. Okay. Our designs, our sites don't do anything on their own. Okay. I know this sounds a little bit of a weird thing. I suppose you could put it on fixed time and it'll run around. But fundamentally, they are sat there. They do not do anything. Okay. What we're trying to do with the site is we are trying, and I'm going to put this in really crude, offensive terms in a way, we are trying to manipulate strangers to do what we want. That's what we're doing with traffic signals, with lights. There are people out there, we do not know them, but we want them to do something correctly as we see it, as they drive through the network. Okay. And if we do that right, they will stay safe. And also, if we do it right and they do it correctly and understand correctly, we'll probably get more traffic through and everybody gets on and we cut delay as well. So people are actually having to use our sites, our designs. So our designs have actually got to lead people, not just control them, okay? Not just manipulate people, because we can't do that. They don't even know that. Okay, we need to lead people to do what we want them to do. And we can only do that through the design. We're not on site. I have been on site and I have shouted through the odd window, particularly at one person who had ignored all the overheight vehicle signs and had an absolute argument with him as he tried to drive a refrigerated Luton van underneath a low bridge. If we do our job well, if we get the design correct and we lead people to do what we want, then we get the compliance. That's how we achieve this good practice. So I'm going to say this is sort of feels a little bit odd. I'm going to talk about perception, and this is psychology. For my sins, I know a number of psychologists. They're strange people. Perception, though. Perception's what's really important, okay? It is how people, everybody, instinctively understands their surroundings, okay? And when I say instinctively, I mean really fast. I think someone said earlier about, well, you learn it and you have to learn it to get good and to get fast, and that's true, okay? Driving relies on instinctive reactions, okay, to be good. When you're a learner, that's why you're a bit clunky and why you're slow getting off and moving away. And once you've learnt it, that's because it's not just you know it, it's because you instinctively do it, which makes it fast. Okay? Reading, by the way, is not particularly instinctive. Okay? So when we put text in front of people and ask them to read it, that is not instinctive. People might instinctively recognize the odd word, recognize names, recognize a stop sign, but it's not the same as reading text. There's a couple of really strange things that happen with perception. One of them is us humans ignore things that we don't expect, okay? There is an absolute cracking, I think a lot of people might have seen it over the years, there's a YouTube video where you're asked to count the number of times a ball is passed between white players, and in the middle of it all, a gorilla walks through, waves at the camera and walks off. And if you're concentrating on how many times the ball is passed, you don't see the gorilla. Okay. There's another weird thing that goes on in our minds, all of us. It's something called, I'll try and get this right, pareidolia. Pareidolia. Okay. This is our instinctive, natural reaction to see patterns in things, even when they don't necessarily exist. Elvis in a piece of toast, a cloud that looks like a car, okay? And this is going on all the time in our minds as we're driving. We're both ignoring what we don't expect, and we are seeing what we do expect, okay? We're seeing patterns in things. So just going back to what I said about our designs must lead people, well, the drivers must correctly perceive the junction and get that bit right in their heads almost instantly with very little delay. Otherwise, they may make mistakes and they will probably never know that they made a mistake. Okay? So back on the design. Okay? When we're building a design, we don't generally look at it in the same way that the public will look at our designs. We're looking at it on a plan, on a computer, maybe in a visualization environment, but we are not driving at it in a car, in a tin box at 40 miles per hour with everything flashing past fast. We sit there and we meticulously go over it and make sure everything's there, and it's all there, but we don't actually ever, it's very hard to do, to actually experience our own designs in the way that drivers will use it. We have to bear that in mind. So just considering the guidance and the standards and applying that doesn't consider driver perception. Some of the guidance, and there's some really good guidance, some of the guidance, some of the standards is kind of built implicitly on this without us realizing. Manual for Streets and Manual for Streets 2, really good. It kind of pulls all this in, talks about designing for places, doesn't really say why, really, but it's along these lines of thinking how it will be seen, perceived, and used and work. So we need to look at and think about how we can apply this practically. We are going to show a few cases. I'm going to talk through the first one because it's one I'm familiar with, and then Ethan's actually been out and around looking at a few specific sites. I didn't go out to this one. This is one I know, and I'm going to also say this is no criticism over any of the designs. All the designs, as far as I'm aware, and all this work, it was either done to standard or was done deliberately trying to get the correct result. So there's no implicit criticism. This is really looking at why didn't that work? It should have. Okay, so you can see this photo. This photo is really what I want to concentrate on for the moment. It's the approach to a large roundabout. Okay, fully at grade. A site called Junction 18, signalled roundabout with a lifetime of really severe, nasty accidents. A lot of accidents, several fatals. On the face of it, nothing wrong with this design. What you can just about see, there's a mast head popping out. The site has got tall poles. It's got a mast arm on this approach. There's loads of signals. If you go back, there's really good visibility from a long way back. There really should be no problem with it. It's all there. The photo's just changed. Okay, now, I wasn't involved in this. I talked to the people involved and ran through it. There's one thing changed between this and this, and the barrier rail moved. And the barrier rail moved from the centre, going straight in a dead straight line through the centre, and it was moved over to follow the curb edge. That barrier rail, as far as I'm aware, has never been hit either before or afterwards. So it's not the barrier railing saving people, but the accidents since that was changed have halved without anybody hitting it. And the reason for it is because in the early hours of the morning, when you're driving down that road, which is a big, wide road, and you look into the distance, there's a traffic light, as most people would see it, on the left-hand side. There's a barrier on the right that reflects your headlights, and there's a lovely, great big gap, and it looks like you're approaching a traffic signal junction. And at the last minute, they hit the curb, they go over the primary pole, and they disappear off over the middle of the roundabout and hit a tree. And moving that rail doesn't stop them leaving the road. As they drive down the road, you see the road curve. That's all. That's the entire change. But the road curves right in front of the driver. Okay.
So, as Chris mentioned a little while ago, I went out to some sites for the research for this paper. I spent about an hour and a half on each of these sites, and this is basically what I saw while I was out there. So, the first site is Limekiln Close in Peterborough. It's a T-junction that had no known previous problems. As you can see in the design, there's no offside island, so those drivers that are turning right are really quite up close and personal with the oncoming traffic. And off in the distance, you can see that there is a far-sided secondary, which really helps draw the driver's eye line into the junction and towards that oncoming traffic. You can also see in the design that the right turn box for those people that are turning is really quite long. You can fit about 4 or 5 cars in there. However, the whole time I was there, I think the furthest anyone really pulled into that junction was about 1.5 cars length. Nobody really overshot it. I think the closest we got was a couple of people with their front wheel on the stop line. But for the majority, all the drivers gave way correctly and everybody knew what they were doing. So, next site is Views Common in Huntingdon. This is a new site when it went in with opposed right turns, and unfortunately those drivers failed to give way. This is what the design went in first. We've got a stop line, we've got an ASL, we've got a PED crossing, and then closely associated secondaries with full green aspects across the board. This did not work. There was multiple crashes here with drivers just failing to give way, and numerous times I've been on site, me and Chris have been on site, clearing wing mirrors out the gutters, bumpers out in the middle of the junction. It was just a mess. So, changes were made, and there was some white lining added after the pedestrian crossing. 2 sets of white lines, and then a right turn arrow in the middle to kind of help those drivers understand that they do have to pull forward, but they are going to have to give way when they get into the junction. This didn't work either. There were still plenty of crashes here. People still didn't give way. So more changes were made. It was separately signalled. The right lane became a right turn only lane, and then the left lane became a head and left. So it was no longer a problem that people didn't give way because they didn't have to give way. Third junction is A10 London Road in Harston. This is a T-junction, once again, no known previous problems. It's a fully signalled right turn with distant secondary signals. However, anyone that knows this site knows that there's quite a lot going on after the stop line. You can see that there's a near side island, there's road markings after the stop line, there's arrows after the stop line. It's all a little bit busy. So while I was out there, the thing I noticed and demonstrated quite nicely in the photo here is people overshoot that stop line massively. There's people halfway over the stop line, fully over the stop line, running reds, and there was also a really, really large number of drivers that were hitting the brakes either really, really quite late and really hard to kind of either stop themselves from overshooting or overshoot a little bit less than they would have done had they not stopped right at the last minute. And the final site that we went to was Chalkwell Avenue in Southend. It's crossroads, junction, nothing crazy, no crazy additions to the junction. As you can kind of see in the photo there, the little red aspect, there is a far-sided secondary for the drivers on the main road, and demonstrated by that black Clio there. The drivers coming out of the side roads see that as a primary for the pedestrian crossing just in front of the car, and they do stop despite not necessarily needing to stop because it's not for them. Now, anyone that knows the site or has been on the site knows that just to the left over there's a piano shop, and the man that owns that piano shop, as soon as he sees anyone working on the lights, will come out and say, oh, you need to change this. People are coming out the side road, the people are seeing this and they're stopping. I think alignment's been changed, hoods been changed, all sorts have been really gone on here, but nothing's really stopped people from treating that as a primary for an internal stop line that just isn't there.
Thank you. So, drivers are relying on their autopilot to respond quickly enough. We've talked about that's what I've said before the examples. While drivers are in that state, their perception is narrowed and diminished. There's been papers that have looked at this, a paper in 2016, another one in 2017. A lot of recent work shows how perception reduces. And it's slightly strange, but that in itself does not cause accidents. Okay? They couldn't find any direct causation from narrowed perception to accidents occurring, except all the accidents that occur have diminished perception. So it's contributory, but not the only cause. It is a natural coping mechanism, and this is what they've demonstrated. It's how we deal with huge amounts of information coming at us really fast, say doing 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. So throwing more information at drivers is not effective. What we need to do, and I think this has been said many times, is we need to show, not tell. Okay? The perception of how the signals exist, work, and are is as important as visibility is. If we place the signals close to the driver's line of sight, then we create that awareness, not just visibility, but if we put it in their line of sight right in front or close to them, we build awareness, not just visibility. And we can use secondary signals to actually draw the driver's line of sight where they're going to look. We can put the secondary on the far side near the opposing traffic, where we want them to pull forward and look and give way, or we can pull it back and stop them earlier. We need to lead the driver through the junction where we want them, and we need to think about the fixed environment around it. I'm not talking text signs, I'm not really talking signs other than how they form the surrounding environment. Okay. So local conventions are really useful, really important. Building strong local conventions and holding to those, because it builds that familiarity. That means that they won't come across anything particularly unexpected. If they travel further afield, they don't know those sites, they don't know that area, and they're more prepared and paying more attention. They're learning when they travel. So that's less of a problem. But locally, they expect everything to be very similar. That's where they're traveling with the reduced perception. So use those white lines and the position of the signals to tell a story. Just remember, once the perception is formed, the first time the driver comes through there, it's really hard to shake. And once the first driver does it and everybody watches them, they instinctively learn from the people they've watched. Think how it's going to look from the driver's perspective, not just not just in 3 dimensions, but actually at speed. Think how they'll experience it and make those features distinctive, but easy to understand. Avoid ambiguity and just build this recognizability and familiarity. Okay. I know I need to wrap up, but avoid using more. Avoid lots of different. Okay, don't just throw white lining at the problem or text or signs. Okay, they can be counterproductive, not just ineffective, but counterproductive by adding to the information overload on the driver. Okay, simpler and more familiar may well be the answer to the problems that you're quite possibly experiencing. So this is effectively, to summarize it all up just into 2 lines. We need to perform the magician's trick. Only let them see what we want them to see. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions if we've got time?
Thank you, Chris and Ethan. Probably got time for one quick question if we've got any hands up. If we've got any hands up. No. Oh, yes.
Chris, Ethan, thank you. A few years ago, Chris, you stood up the front here and talked about driver behaviour on a merge leading out of Cambridge, I believe, where the issue there wasn't a catastrophic outcome, it was failure to utilise capacity. Are the ideas that you're discussing here applicable in a situation where drivers are being too polite and too considerate?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think they are. I think they're 2 different things going on.
Okay.
My conclusion from that earlier work on merges was really that was almost a risk management thing that drivers were doing, that nobody wants to be caught out late, so they just merge early. Okay. Rather than it being a perception or misunderstanding it. You could argue they don't understand how we intend it to work. That's entirely possible, but I think they are perceiving it as built and making a conscious choice, whereas what we're talking about here really is people misperceiving.
I saw it as a case of them still not doing what we wanted them to do.
True.
Unused capacity, but
yeah,
a different situation.
So. Yeah.
Thank you.
Potentially one more question if there's anybody. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Chris, I just wanted to ask you whether you think driving lessons and tests should be changed.
For this and what we're talking about, I'm not sure anything there would be effective, because I think the conclusion of the studies that I was talking about, I think there's some notes in the actual paper that refer to those studies. What they demonstrated was this is innate human behaviour. So trying to change that and overcome that and teach it would be very, very difficult to get anybody to actually maintain that, if that makes sense. My view is that we really have to work with that and work around them, not just make it easy, but actually think how people will respond to it and how they'll see it. And we just need to take that into consideration when we're doing design work.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
A final round of applause.